Welcome to the Business Results Program. This is how you can transform yourself, your team, and your whole company. My name is Pete Winiarski. I'm the CEO of Win Enterprises, LLC, and this video is us recording a podcast episode. Podcast Business Results Radio. Look up businessresultsradio.com or go check it out on iTunes or one of the other podcast platforms. And do subscribe and do give a 5-star review. Now, you as a business leader, we get what you're going through. You've got overwhelm and stress and frustration. You have high expectations on your shoulders, some of which you put there yourselves. Why can I say this? Because we, our team, we've experienced this ourselves. We have been business leaders. We know what it's like. And boy, how cool is it that you have this resource. You can listen to this podcast, gain some insights about what you can do differently, gain some ideas, some strategies that you can put in place right away to make your life easier. That's what we're after here. We want your life to be easier because being a business leader does not have to be this challenging, doesn't have to be this hard. And we want you to exceed your expectations, excel, and achieve the results you want, get your team to thrive, and your company to just absolutely go right through the roof. And you can do that here. Enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, Pete Winiarski here. Welcome to Business Results Radio. Today, I am here talking with Lisa Ryan. Lisa, hello.
Hi, it's good to be here.
I am excited, Lisa, because you and I have we've played together a little bit. We've shared stages together. We've done podcast episodes together. And you're just, a fun person who happens to know a whole lot of important topics. So welcome back.
Well, thank you.
Today we're getting into generations. And what's interesting, we were just having a short chat before we turned the button on here to record. There's this phenomenon where there's the 4 generations in the workforce at any one point in time, right? So, now you've got, there's still some baby boomers out there who are working. There's Gen X's like me. Then there's the millennials, which are the Ys, and then the Zs, which are the new ones. Those are what my kids are, and they're working, right? So somebody has to manage, my 18-year-old and 16-year-old, and how do you do that, right? That's really the big question. And in some of the research that we've been doing in terms of the biggest challenges business leaders find today and that they have to deal with, one of those is the generational dynamics. And it's gotten to a point where it's risen right up there with like machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's side by side in terms of how do I figure this out as a business leader? So that's what today's conversation is. Lisa is going to crack the code for us.
Or at least give you some ideas as far as things you can do.
That's exactly what we want. That's exactly what we want. You as a business leader out there, go ahead and take some notes on this one because you definitely have to interact with people in the different generations. And you may have figured out that not everybody is the same, right? So let's start with that premise. And that's actually a good thing. Would you say, Lisa, do we want everyone kind of robots walking around our job places or our communities exactly the same?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And even though there are 4 active generations in the workplace. In the programs that I do on this, I do like to start with traditionalists. I mean, I know there's very few traditionalists still left in the workforce because they were born before 1945. But when it comes to them kind of setting that foundation, because this was a generation that, they had one job their entire life. They made that commitment. There was this lifetime employment that they just assumed that they would have. So they didn't expect things like, being recognized or applauded or appreciated for their efforts because they were going to work to support their family. And so you had a very traditional upbringing as far as that goes. But then when boomers came into the workforce, it was 1946 to 1964, this was the workforce, this was a generation that kind of looked at what the traditionalists had amassed over their career, which you can have a pretty nice career being at one company for 30, 40, 50 years. But the boomers decided that they wanted that much more quickly than the other generation. So that's when they decided to create the term workaholic. And this was a generation that they gave so much time, money. They thought it was all about face time, coming into work way before their boss gets there, working way after their boss is leaving, being proud of the fact that they hadn't taken a vacation in 15 years, destroying their marriage in the process, because boomers were so busy focusing on the things that aren't necessarily important in that career that sometimes they neglected the relationships that were. And that's really when we started seeing divorce rates starting to be 50% of all marriages ending in divorce. And then, in their 40s and 50s is when corporate America kind of said, you know what, we don't really need you. We're going to hire people who are younger and cheaper than you. And the boomers found themselves kicked out. Well, all along, Gen X, which is 1965 to 1980, comes into the workplace. Now, I like to say that Gen X is the smallest of the generations, 75 million boomers, 40 million Gen Xers, primarily because boomers were way too busy working to actually reproduce. But as Gen Xers are observing what happened to boomers, number one, they were the latchkey children. They were raised in single-family households. Or actually, they were raised by Barney, but that's another.
Yeah, that's right. The purple dinosaur.
Very self-sufficient generation, very cynical generation, because they also saw how the boomers gave so much of themselves to corporate America and how they were basically just eliminated. And so Gen Xers came and they said, I think I want this thing called work-life balance. So when they came in, they wanted to work until 5 and not have that be considered a half day.
Right,
so,
right.
I still remember, and you probably remember it too, that Time magazine article with the big pink, it was like pink cover that called Gen X slackers and like all
I do, yeah.
All the stuff that we now call millennials. Well, boomers were calling Gen Xers that way back in the day, because that's what we do.
I remember at one point early in my career, I asked my boss, hey, do you mind if I work a half day tomorrow? And he said, sure, pick any 12 hours you want.
And he wasn't joking. That's
right.
Part. So it really, where Gen Xers had the same work ethic of wanting to do a good job, wanting to grow in their career, they also had different priorities that the boomers had to kind of wrap their head around, and they weren't getting it. So hence the slacker term. Millennials came in 1980 to now they're saying about 1996. Sometimes you'll see it extended to 2000. It's a little fuzzy when it comes to Gen Y, also known as millennials. But this is a generation who, remember, were raised by boomers who told them that they could do anything that they wanted to do, be anyone they wanted to be. And with the boomers, remember how I told you the traditionalists didn't really care about getting recognized for doing the job?
Right.
Well, boomers are like starved for attention because they're giving all of this effort to corporate America, and the traditionalists are like, well, why should I thank you? That's what you're getting paid for.
Yeah, you get a check. Be happy about it.
Yeah. So boomers did not want their millennial offspring to feel that pain of not being recognized. So now we have the trophy generation, the participation ribbon, all of that stuff that we complain about, but yet boomers are the ones that came up with that. And what does that mean in the workplace? This is a generation that has been getting feedback since they were young kids. So if you're only doing a once a year personal performance review, not enough.
Right.
It's constant check-ins. How are you doing? Millennials have also had access to leadership. In my day, because I'm the last year of the boomers, my parents would tell me where we were going on vacation. With millennials, the boomers would ask them, so where would you like to go on vacation this year? Their opinions mattered. Their opinions counted for everything. So again, if you have a leadership team where there's all kinds of levels before those millennial employees can talk to leadership, not happening. They want access. They want to be listened to. They want to be paid attention to. They also are the most educated of all the generations, because remember, boomers going to college was a gift. It was not expected. But because they wanted better things for their children, they took them the 4-year college route instead of going to trade and technical schools, which, by the way, we have to change that conversation. Not everybody's cut out for college, and we need people in the trades.
Okay. We do, yes.
But changing that conversation. So these millennials are coming into the workforce with tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, with no end in sight of seeing how they're going to pay that off. So when they come to you and they're interviewing and they want $50 an hour to start, it's not that they think that they actually deserve it. They're just trying to figure out, how am I going to pay off these student loans?
Yeah, it's about making ends meet.
Yeah. Getting moved out of my parents' basement,
and what's interesting, just to, before we get into the sort of the punchline on, this next one coming up, so you described, that you're right at the end of that boomer range, and I'm right at the beginning of the X, because I was born in '66. And so, you shared, because you have the boomers, then the X, then the Y. So just, for those of you figuring out how old your parents are, sort of thing, so you pointed out that the boomers had the offsprings of the millennials. And here I am as an X, and my offspring is now, the Z, right? The new one coming in. So pretty interesting dynamic there. You kind of have this leapfrogging over, if you will.
Yep. Yeah, and that's an important thing, because remember, with the Gen Xers being the most cynical of all the generations, number one, they're these tiny generation, 75 million boomers, 73 million millennials, and even though I can't find the numbers for it, Gen Z, the newest generation, is the largest generation to date. They make
I think I saw 90 plus million.
Yeah, so 24% of the population is this Gen Z. So we have an entire generation being raised by, a smaller and more cynical generation. But if you think about the Gen Z, they came in when we went through an economic downturn. Millennials were in when the economy was wonderful and everything was fine, and the Gen Z saw their Gen X parents lose everything. They're extremely frugal. They want stability. They want cash. The whole making a difference, having a purpose thing that millennials are all about. Gen Z, no, give me the career path, give me the cash.
Yeah, give me the money.
Yeah.
And so there's one of the things I want to talk about, and we'll get there in a second, is related to, what do you do in your company when you have these different groups to make sure that you're managing and being effective with your teams and how they play nice together, if you will. The other thing, though, is just to round out some of the attributes. I think what you just shared is an absolute critical baseline foundation. So let's talk about a few of the things that are dynamics out there just in the economy. So home buying. Who are the ones who want to buy homes and who doesn't care?
I think that because the economy is changing so much to this gig economy, that home ownership isn't as important as, like with boomers, it was just something you made it when you had a home. With Gen Xers, it was that settling down and being with family. Millennials and Gen Z, because they're moving so much more, they're not staying loyal, they're not staying to a company with a company as long. So they may be moving across the country, all over the place every couple of years. So it's a nice to have, But if you think about the student loan debt variables that they have, as well as the price of housing in basically a seller's market, it's not easy for these newest generations to achieve home ownership.
Right. And I see a lot of communities where they could care less about owning a car. They're just happy to hop in Lyft or Uber.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, back in the day, that's what I think a lot of managers don't understand is the very essence of time has changed in the way that we work. I mean, right now we're on 24/7 anyway, but back in the day, if I was going to the airport, I would call this thing called a cab, and somebody who hated what they did for a living would come and pick me up and take me to the airport in a filthy car with no air conditioning.
Right.
Now, I have my Uber or Lyft driver that comes with snacks and cold water and charging stations, and they love what they do. And I can actually see the little car on the app and know exactly when that person is going to show up.
Yeah,
So
it's really fabulous.
it's a different time. We're boomers, we work, well, I shouldn't say 9 to 5 because none of us stopped at 5, but there were hours and we had an answering machine. If we didn't get back to somebody for a day or two, it was no big deal. With this thing right here, we are on 24/7. And with the smartphones, with technology, if somebody sends me a text, I think, oh, I got to answer it. If my boss sends me an email at 3 o'clock in the morning because they can't sleep and they had a thought pop in their mind, they thought they'd just blast off an email, your millennial or Gen Z employees going, oh, crap, I got to respond to this or else they're going to think I'm not paying attention. So we're wired differently in the way that we react to business communications.
Let's talk a little bit about social media, because that certainly has created this fear of missing out, FOMA, and the idea of I got to know right away, I have to respond back right away, and I'm doing it in short, back and forth responses, but not with an individual, with this, maybe with an individual, but on this platform, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Just talk about how that plays in.
Well, it plays in on every level. Number one, you see people, making gazillions of dollars being, YouTube stars and things like that. So we have a different perception of what celebrity is these days. But we have this FOMO because, of course, we're not putting on on social media when life is bad and when we're having a crappy day. For the most part, we're sharing when life is beautiful, and then all of our friends are thinking, oh my goodness, her life must be awesome all the time, and it's not. But from a business standpoint, you have websites like Glassdoor, that if I am a potential employee looking at going to interview for a job at your organization, and I go on Glassdoor and I see tons of disgruntled employees writing crappy reviews, and management is not responding to it, there's a good chance I'm never even going to submit my resume, so you don't know that I'm on the market. Now, granted, you will always have disgruntled employees who will be more than happy to post negative crap about you on social media. But if you see that, if you're paying attention, and if I go on that same site on Glassdoor and I see a bad review, but then an HR manager or the owner of the company says, this has come up, this is what we're doing, to change the culture, we've had a conversation, whatever it is, that I know that leadership is paying attention, and maybe that employee was just that bad apple. Also, for social media, if I go to your website, if I go to your Facebook page, am I seeing people who look like me? Or is it a bunch of corporate, basically old white guys on your website? So we have to look at who are we looking to hire? Do you have young? Do you have different ethnic races and genders and all of these type of people represented on your website? Because Gen Z is the most culturally diverse generation that has ever come onto the scene. And if you and it's noticeable if you don't have some kind of diversity represented in what you're putting out there in social media.
Yeah, and so what you're talking about is, really from an attractiveness standpoint, you might, as a leader, be thinking, well, wait a minute, do I care about the Z's yet? So here's some perspective. And Lisa, you mentioned that in some cases, the definition started like in the late 90s, 96 or something. In others, it started at 2000, depending on when officially the millennials ended and the Gen Z started. But that means that someone who's in that 18 to 24 or so range, who is entering your workforce right now, is a Gen Z. So, you as a business leader, you're pointing out that you are hiring Gen Zs right now. They are either the ones going into college right now or coming out of college right now, depending on the definition. But essentially, they're either part-time workers like my son who's 18, or these are people who come out of college ready for a job. So these attributes of Gen Z, they're critical for you to appreciate, because that's your next group coming in.
Right. And something to keep in mind too, that when we have these transitional generations, like even though I'm the last year of the boomers and you're early in Gen X, I have a lot of Gen X qualities. You probably have a lot of boomer qualities.
Mm-hmm.
As millennials go into Gen Z, and now Gen Z is coming in, they probably have some of those traits, but Gen Z also wants nothing to do with being called a millennial because of the lambasting that we have been doing, the unjust lambasting that we have been doing about millennials for the last 10 or 15 years or however long, that we've been unjustly putting this group into the lazy and entitled category, which is the furthest thing from the truth that you can imagine.
Right. Let me talk about that a second. It's interesting. I was at a workshop where in fact, it was one that over the course of a couple of days where you and I were there at the same time. And I was sitting in the audience. So I'm in the back row and I'm sitting next to someone who's the vice president of HR for whatever company she worked at. And the presenter was talking about, oh, those millennials, it's exactly what you just said, right? You're going to have trouble with these people. And she leaned over and said to me, I wish people would just stop. And really, as you pointed out, there's, the Gen Zs, it's the greatest number of people, but they're not all in the workforce yet. The millennials is the biggest number generation in the workforce. Here's the vice president of HR and the speaker who was, kind of blasting millennials, as you just pointed out, was just repeating what we've all said. And I remember the first time that I had, about 20 years ago or so, actually not quite that long, about 15 or so, I had a radio program called the Institute of Success and Goal Achievement. And that was the first time that I had someone on talk about generations. Of course, there was no Z then, and the millennials was the new one just coming in to the workforce. And, we had in our conversation, as this person was talking about the attributes of a millennial, you don't know what it is yet, but here it comes. And, the problem with that, we don't know what it is, here it comes, it's going to be different, it's going to be difficult. That language never stopped, right?
Right.
And that's what you're pointing out here, and that's what this woman was so frustrated about. She is a vice president in a company because she's earned it through her skills and her ability to achieve, and now she's a decision maker, an executive. So, for all of you out there who are listening, you're probably in that group too, because the numbers, the raw numbers, suggest the highest probability that you in your company are a millennial. So we're not talking about any of these generations as good or bad, et cetera. I want to just emphasize and stress what Lisa just said, because it is so important to appreciate we as human beings have something to offer. I'm different than Lisa. Lisa and I are different than people in other generations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about appreciating differences and then understanding how can we work within our set of skills and our strengths and our weaknesses and come together in a collaborative team.
Right. I remember I saw a speaker a couple of years ago that was doing a program on millennials, and she had the best sentence. She said that for me to say that all millennials are lazy and entitled would be like me saying all women are lazy and entitled, or
Right.
all Asians are lazy and entitled. You know, you say a sentence like that and it feels icky to even say it. So what right does anybody have to take an entire generation and lump them into this category just because they are wired differently? Where the Gen Xers were digital pioneers, now you guys were the ones that started sharing, you know, downloading, okay, stealing music and movies and everything.
Napster, right? Napster.
But so you started it. Millennials, and especially now Gen Z, because you do have some millennials that actually know what dial-up sounds like. You know, Gen Z has never heard it unless they go on YouTube and they think it's kind of cool. And it's like, oh, not cool. No, it wasn't at all. But we process things differently. So where a Gen Z or Gen Xer who's been, you know, playing with an iPad since they were 3 has a different understanding of technology than a boomer, then maybe it takes a little bit longer for them to understand the technology, and they're afraid of it. So it's just, you know, where we have one group of people that this is my life. I've never known life with a phone with a cord, you know, and this generation over here going, what do you mean we're going to paperless?
Yes,
It's
exactly.
a different way of doing business. But like I tell my audiences, unless you are willing to look at every single area of your business differently today than you did 10 years ago, you are really setting yourself up for failure. We have to think things that have never been thought before and be okay with the fact. I mean, I look at how much technology, and you, same thing with you, has changed in our lifetime, even in the last, you know, since 1996 when I got my first, you know, flip phone.
Right. Back then, a cloud was a white fluffy thing. Huh?
You know? So it's just different. And if we can understand that from generation to generation, we're processing our world differently. And even though we've been complaining about generations literally since the beginning of time, today it really is different. Today the generations are different than they've ever been before. And that change is going to keep continuing.
You know, it's interesting. My dad was a high school teacher, and of course, you know, he started teaching. I don't know exactly what how year old he was. He had to be in his 20s, I'm guessing, right? Because you come out of, you get your bachelor's, and you get your master's, and then you get your teaching job. So he had to be in his mid 20s, I'm guessing. And so he started then, and of course he taught until he was, you know, in his 60s. And again, not exactly sure what year, but essentially that's 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. The biggest complaint from teachers that he shared, he would say every single year, the teachers would say, oh, the kids these days just aren't blah, 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 or just, you know, and it's the setup is exactly what you just pointed out, where the previous generation is always complaining about the next one. You know, the new one is always the problem, and you know, that's not really the case. You know, it's more about understanding. This is where some of the programs that we do in the leadership development and the team effectiveness side have to do with understanding individuals as individuals, and what are their skills for sure, but what are their styles and preferences, and what weighs into that. And of course, generation and the differences is one of the huge variables that ends up shaping how somebody thinks. It's their beliefs, it's their perspectives, it's their likes. And then you get into the personality side of things, and now you've got a super unique individual. Then it's on you as the business leader to appreciate first who you are, but then who are they, and what slight tweaks can you make in your style of communicating, of asking for work to be done, of sharing ideas, etc., of engaging them. What tweaks can you make to get the most out of that relationship, as opposed to just shoving it on them and hoping that it works out?
Yeah. And asking them for their ideas and suggestions. Again, we have two generations that are the most educated of any generation before them. They also see the world differently. So when they join your organization and your whole thought is, well, we've always done it this way, we've been doing it, we've been in business for 50 years, this is the way we've always done it. But really listening to what they have to say, because they may not be from your industry. They may have no experience in your industry whatsoever, but the knowledge, the experiences, the technical expertise that they are bringing in with them, if you're open to it, can completely transform your business and make it even better and stronger than it was before they got there.
Yes, absolutely. Capital YES for sure. So just rapid round at the end here. What are some tips that come to mind for a business leader or for a team, someone who now has these generations to work with? You could be on a team and there's someone who's older than you, there's someone who's younger than you. You've got to figure out, how do we get the job done? How do we make it fulfilling for the individuals, right? How do we get the business results? So how do you do all of that? What are some ideas that you can share today?
Well, one of the best ways is putting together some kind of mentoring mentee program. Number one, it lets you know, your baby boomers and your more tenured employees, that they still have value. A couple of years ago, my husband started reporting to two people who were younger than him. And it was pretty devastating. He wasn't feeling relevant anymore. And so just to take advantage of the knowledge, the skills, the experience that tenured employee has, and put them together with this new employee, because also you have that tenured employee saying, well, why should I make friends with that person? I mean, they're just going to be gone in 6 months anyway. Well, what if you did develop a relationship with that person? What if you did become their friend and now you're the reason that they stay? So looking at ways that you can get people of different generations to work together, to be on teams together, to really understand, to have, there's so many different types of fun, ice-breaking opportunities to get together and just kind of learn and come from a place of understanding. Because when you can be, like I like to say, I'm an equal opportunity offender when it comes to the generations, but when you call out the different generations, we all have good points, we all have bad points, and we can all laugh about ourselves and understand a little bit better as far as why that person acts like that.
Yeah, and back to the point of, here's someone who might only be here 6 months. Why do I bother getting to know them? Well, what if you did get to know them? And as you pointed out, you were the reason they stayed. Well, what if they still left and you kept in touch with them? Now you've just expanded your network, right? So you, Lisa, are one of the most masterful networkers that I know. I mean, you're outstanding at that. So I just see the opportunity for an individual to become the friend to others and allow that to just to expand and continue.
Well, and also, even when that employee does leave for another opportunity, if you have that good relationship because of that mentor-mentee relationship, who's to say that that employee that left for a better opportunity isn't now going to recommend one of their friends, isn't going to talk highly about your job, about your place of business on social media, isn't going to encourage other people to take the job there? So again, we expand our networks, and thank you for that compliment. That was really nice. But, it's just that not every person is going to stay in every job forever, but they came in, there's that reason, season type of thing. They come in for a reason, they come in for a season, and we're okay with that. And we continue the relationship. When I was in the welding industry, I left that business in 2003. And my boss that I reported to is still one of my best friends on the planet. So when you can have those long-term relationships with people, and I will never work for Dale again. There was when I left that, I was, I went on and I knew that, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't be friends.
Mm-hmm. Right. Excellent conversation today, Lisa. Thank you. And just as we wrap here, my parting words of encouragement to you listeners as business leaders are, as tough as you think you're having it with the different individuals on your team, certainly know that there's, back to what you pointed out, they're there for the season and for a reason. There's reasons that you're having the experiences that you are. Take the value from that and then see what you can do by you making some tweaks inside of you rather than a complaint about the other person. And what can you do to tweak your style, your approach ever so slightly to make a deeper connection? And let's see if that raises up your experience, their experience, your team's results, etc.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for joining Business Results Radio, and we'll catch you soon on another episode.